Articles of Confederation v. Constitution tonight. So again, please turn to chapter 9. Reminder on these, we had good energy last week. I was really happy with the energy. These work best, don't be shy. These work best by trying to jog your memory as to what you know. So there's that. So, where it says chapter summary, do I have a volunteer on this beautiful evening? Go for it, Alexander. Thank you so much. Starting with the American Revolution.
The American Revolution did not overturn the social order, but it did produce substantial changes in social customs, political institutions, and ideas about society and government. Among the changes were the separation of church and state in some places, the abolition of slavery in the North, written political constitutions, and a shift in political power from the eastern seaboard toward the frontier. The first weak national government, the Articles of Confederation, was unable to exercise real authority, although it did successfully deal with the Western lands issue. The Confederation's weaknesses in handling foreign policy, commerce, and the Shays Rebellion spurred the movement to alter the Articles. Instead of revising the Articles, the well-off delegates to the Constitutional Convention created a permanent charter for a whole new government. In a series of compromises, the convention produced a plan that provided for a vigorous central government, a strong executive, and protection for property while still upholding Republican principles and states' rights. The pro-Constitution Federalists, generally representing wealthier and more commercial forces, frightened other groups who feared that the new government would undermine their rights and their interests. The Federalists met their strongest opposition from anti-Federalists in Virginia and New York, but through effective organization and argument, as well as promises to incorporate a Bill of Rights into the document, they succeeded in getting the Constitution ratified. By establishing the new national government, the Federalists checked the revolutionary movement, but their conservative regime embraced the central revolutionary values of popular Republican government and liberty.
Okay, let's set up this chapter. It's 3 parts, really. It's the Articles of Confederation. It's the Constitution. And it is ratification settled with the Federalist Papers, playing a part in the ratification. Not the Bill of Rights yet, and actually the Bill of Rights starts chapter 10. But let's talk about the Articles of Confederation first of all. Why is it the government that is exactly what the new Americans wanted? Go for it, Casey. It's weak. Their feeling was they had just broken away from tyrannical Britain, so this government gives the new Americans their what back? Salutary neglect. It gives back salutary neglect. It is weak on purpose. It is designed that way in order to give all of the power to what? The federal government or the states? States, right? It is a confederation. By definition, that means a loose grouping. So this is a loose grouping of states. That's it. That's exactly what they want. By design. My argument is, and most historians agree with me, that the Articles of Confederation had to fail for the Constitution to be successful. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, there are many things the Articles of Confederation does not do well, and we'll get to that in just a minute. There is one thing it does very well. What is the one thing that the Articles does very well? Anybody remember what it does well? And the summary alludes to it briefly. Go for it, Aiden.
Divide up the land in the West.
Very good. Land distribution. It divides up the land in what at that time was known in the as the Old Northwest. We are sitting and standing in an area of the Old Northwest right now. So the one plus it has is in land distribution. And in that land distribution, there will be 2 laws. The Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Which one of them deals with township design? Is that the Land Ordinance or the Northwest Ordinance? That's the Land Ordinance. It's real simple, actually. The Land Ordinance divides up land. So it divides up the land into 6 by 6 square mile townships. The design is these townships will be sold and make money for the federal government. That's really important, because under the Articles, could you have any taxes? No, they couldn't tax, right? So they can make money. It's a 6 by 6 square mile township, so don't worry at the break, I go over all this for you, no worries. But you can only buy 35 total of these townships for each of these 6 by 6 square mile townships. There were 36 sections, but only 35 you could buy. Section 16 you couldn't buy, because what was Section 16 reserved for? Good. So it establishes public school tradition in the Old Northwest. So it also establishes public schools. Okay, so the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 then does two major things. One is it establishes a path to statehood that would be copied. It says that the area of the Old Northwest will be divided into not less than 3, but not more than 5 states. It would end up being 5. If you're wondering, it's trivial. This part won't be on the AP test, but the 5 states are Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin. Fine. More importantly, it establishes a path to statehood, which is 2 parts. What were the 2? What's one part of the path to statehood? Go for it, Daniel.
Total population count.
Total population of 60,000. Very good. You had to have at least 60,000. Carson, what's the other?
State constitution.
State constitution that is approved by Congress. And then this is key, right? Once you do those 2 things, you have the same rights and privileges once approved by Congress as all the existing states. You're not some territory. You're not a commonwealth. It's the same exact rights and privileges. So it's 2 parts. You write a state constitution that gets approved by Congress, and you have at least 60,000 people. That will be copied. The Northwest Ordinance does one more thing. What is that one more thing that it does? What is it? And it's maybe not even what it does, but it's what it doesn't do. It says that something cannot ever exist in the Old Northwest. What am I thinking? Good. It's the first law in American history that will ban slavery in an area. All right, so that's about the only positive. There are several negatives. If you had to narrow it down now, and you had to give the 2 biggest negatives of the Articles of Confederation, what do you think the 2 biggest negatives were of this? What's one of them? We mentioned one. What's one?
Weak government.
Okay, it's a weak government, absolutely. But let's go a little further. What am I thinking, Kara?
Couldn't tax and couldn't raise a militia.
That's the big 2, right? Couldn't tax, so you can't raise money for the federal government, and you can't raise an army. Okay? So, and that becomes a major problem in 1786 with whose rebellion? Please don't say Bacon's.
Shay.
Very good. Excellent job, group. I'm impressed. 1786, you get Daniel Shays. He is a disgruntled farmer in Massachusetts. He will become the silent delegate at the Constitutional Convention because his rebellion scares the wealthy elites, as we've talked so much about during this course. Now, the Massachusetts State Militia will put this down, but it takes almost a year. Shay raises an army, quote unquote, of 1,000. His rebellion will lead to a convention to initially reform the Articles, but it ends up being the draft of a whole new constitution, which will be a much stronger central government with 3 branches: an executive, a legislative, and a judicial, right? Remember, the Articles only had a legislature. They had a Congress, but that was it. They designed this whole new office that is a president, and you have a much stronger government that can tax, that can regulate commerce, that can raise an army, that can do all of these things, that you don't need 100% of the states to agree to something to get a law or to get an amendment passed. You only need 75. That you don't need a 2/3 majority for a law in Congress, that you need a simple majority. All of these corrections of the Articles become the Constitution. But there's one little problem with the Constitution. It's too what?
Powerful.
Radical.
It's too strong, right? It's too strong. Would the Constitution have ever been ratified without a Bill of Rights? Would it ever happen?
Oh, no.
No, that had to be. So again, if you're doing this, just a reminder, if you get a prompt on this, here's a great way to frame this. The Constitution was loved by all Federalists. They said, yep, we finally got the government that we need. Meanwhile, the Anti-Federalists, and we're talking, there were some heavy hitters who were Anti-Federalists. Patrick Henry comes to mind. Patrick Henry thought the Constitution was way too strong. So the Anti-Federalists at the time loved the Articles of Confederation. And then you have your compromise. It would not have been ratified, and we'll get to the Bill of Rights in the next chapter, but no, would not have been ratified without the promise of a Bill of Rights. Now, you need 9 states for the Constitution to become federal law. And the 2 states that were big states that were holdouts, at least in the beginning, were Virginia and New York. In order to convince New York to ratify the Constitution, the Federalist Papers get written. 3 authors of the Federalist Papers. Anybody remember who's one of the authors of it? Go for it.
Hamilton.
Hamilton's one. Who's another, Daniel?
That was my answer.
Okay, who else? John Jay, very good. First Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And the third, the guy who wrote the Constitution, who would become an anti-federalist when the bank is actually introduced by Alexander Hamilton. And that's James Madison. Okay? So 3 authors of the Federalist Papers. These are essays, short letters. You looked at one of them briefly. That were all addressed to the people of the state of New York. They are published under the name Publius, which simply means of the people. And they are written by Hamilton. It is very possible that you'll get one of the Federalist Papers as a prompt on the test. Not every year, but many years. Either as part of a multiple choice, an SAQ, or a DBQ. Okay? And Hamilton, Madison, and Jay write these as to why New York should ratify the Constitution. You could argue it worked. They do ratify the Constitution. And these are wonderful statements of exactly what the Constitution was designed to do. Okay, we'll leave that be for a minute. Let's go to the key terms, see if we covered everything. Land Ordinance, Northwest Ordinance, all good. Shays Rebellion. Reminder, Great Compromise. It doesn't usually come up, but it designs the bicameral legislature. 2 houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Constitution, Bill of Rights. Electoral College is a compromise because it makes sure that the president is being chosen by really wealthy elites. 3/5 compromise. Why would, I better put that one on the board. Why would the Constitution have not been ratified without the 3/5 compromise? Who is that appeasing? What area of the country? The South, right? And it said, so the 3/5 compromise has to exist. Sadly, it's appeasing the South. And it said it does not say slaves count as 3/5 of the person. It has nothing to do with slaves voting. Slaves could never vote. It said for every 5 slaves, 3 will be added to the number of population in that state, giving more representatives in the House of Representatives. That's what that did. And then, of course, I need to add Republican motherhood, no doubt. Who is the person who is most upset in the country by Republican motherhood?
His wife.
Abigail.
Abigail Adams. Because Abigail Adams wanted what for women at the time? Not only rights, but
Equality.
total equality. Does she get total equality?
No.
She gets Republican motherhood, which means education of women rose. For those of you who don't remember, Republican motherhood said that it is women who will be charged. Basically, Republican motherhood means, you want to use the 5 on the AP test language, it equals that it is women who must teach their children national identity. Enlightenment ideas, how to be patriotic. If it's women, how to be good cult of domesticity mothers. If it's men, it's how to be good soldiers or politicians. Must teach, not teachers. Everything about the new republic, small r republic, that's where Republican motherhood comes from. It is women who must teach their children American national identity. Which means women's education rose, because they've got to be educated to educate their children. But this is not total equality, because does that mean that women are going to be working anywhere outside the home if they're doing this?
No.
No, and there is the conundrum there. Okay, excellent job on that chapter group, home run. And I know a lot of that comes from your civics careers, so I thank Dan Carlson and many others there. Really well done there. I'll give you a minute, and then we'll move to chapter 10, where we will officially welcome President Washington. Another one of those heavy-hitting chapters. Don't worry, if you miss something on the notes, the break will go around. I'll give you plenty of time. Either take pictures, explain what I wrote, whatever it ends up being. Excellent work there. Do I have a volunteer for the summary on chapter 10? Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate you.
The fledgling government faced considerable difficulties and skepticism about its durability, especially since traditional political theories held that large-scale republics were bound to fail. But President Washington brought credibility to the new government, while his cabinet, led by Alexander Hamilton, strengthened its political and economic foundations. The government's first achievements were the Bill of Rights and Hamilton's financial system. Through effective leadership, Hamilton carried out his program of funding the national debt, assuming state debts, imposing customs and excise taxes, and establishing a Bank of the United States. The bank was the most controversial part of Hamilton's program because it raised basic constitutional issues. Opposition to the bank from Jefferson and his followers reflected more fundamental political disagreements about republicanism, economics, federal power, and foreign policy. As the French Revolution evolved from moderation to radicalism, it intensified the ideological divisions between the pro-French Jeffersonians and the pro-British Hamiltonians. Washington's neutrality proclamation angered Republicans, who wanted America to aid revolutionary France. Washington's policy was sorely tested by the British, who routinely violated American neutrality. In order to avoid war, Washington endorsed the conciliatory Jay's Treaty, further outraging the Republicans and France. After the humiliating XYZ affair, the United States came to the brink of war with France, but Adams sacrificed his political popularity and divided his party by negotiated peace. Three foreign policy disagreements embittered domestic politics. Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, to which Jefferson and Madison responded with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions.
Well done, thank you, sir. Now, this chapter has two parts. Most of the chapter is the presidency of George Washington. Part of the chapter is the presidency of John Adams. Washington is president from 1789 until 1797. He takes over in 1789 because he actually takes over on April 30th, the latest of any president to ever take office in the calendar year, because the election just simply was not tabulated. The logistics of it were not done by then. But here's the thing about GW. Even though he's elected basically unanimously, there's not another candidate. Had there ever been a president before?
No.
So does he have, he's got the Constitution, but does he really have a playbook to go on what a president is going to be?
No.
George Washington is the eternal compromise. He's not a king, but he's not no executive like it was under the Articles of Confederation. Technically, he's no political party. He hates political parties, but he acts like, does he act more like a Federalist or an anti-Federalist?
Federalist.
And it's not even close. So let's go in order of what he does. The first thing he does is he says, you know what? I need people to help me. So he establishes a what? It's still around today.
Cabinet.
All right, so let's establish his cabinet. Because this cabinet will be so historic. And in this cabinet, you have Alexander Hamilton as the Secretary of the Treasury, most famous and important Secretary of the Treasury ever. You have Thomas Jefferson as the Secretary of State. And you have Henry Knox as the Secretary of War. We mentioned him here, and then never again. Then, Hamilton, as Secretary of the Treasury, is charged with the American financial system. The country is in debt. It doesn't have a whole lot of respect financially worldwide. And he comes up with Hamilton's financial plan, which has 5 parts. Funding at par, meaning we will pay back all debts, all foreign debts, the assumption of state debts. Those are the debits, what we have to pay out. On the credit side, a little box, this will be Hamilton's financial plan. On the credit side, customs duties, which are tariffs. Excise taxes, which are taxes on goods. Anybody remember the excise tax that Hamilton levies that is the most controversial and the most important? On what good am I thinking of here? Go for it.
Whiskey.
whiskey, right? Leading to the Whiskey Rebellion, which we'll get to in a minute. All of this tracked by a Bank of the United States. Now, Jefferson, as we know so well, the first Bank of the United States to track the debits and credits, track what's going out, track what's coming in. Hamilton goes further and says, you know what, this could put us in a little national debt. The custom duties and the excise taxes are not going to add up. And yet at the same time, we, quite frankly, are okay with that because he thought it built national unity, national identity. Now, here's the problem with this. Who is the biggest critic of this program, and his name is already on the board?
Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. Out of this, you will form the first political party system in the United States, with Hamilton's Federalists rallying around the bank, and Jefferson's Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, JDRs. Not to be confused with FDR, he was president during the Depression, World War II. But anyway, rallying against the bank, railing against the bank. Jefferson begging and pleading, please, George Washington, you've got to kill this. This isn't in the Constitution. Is this in the Constitution anywhere?
No.
No. Hamilton said, no problem. I'm just going to use the elastic clause. It simply says that anything necessary and proper to run the country, Congress can do. Cool. Jefferson says, you're crazy. Well, what does Washington say? Does he allow Hamilton's financial plan? Figure it out, Alexander. That's an order from your commander. So Hamilton's financial plan is allowed. Meanwhile, the next thing, we'll get to that excise tax on whiskey. There are farmers in Pennsylvania that says, this violates our salutary neglect. Did this technically violate salutary neglect? Yeah, technically it did. And so they formed the Whiskey Rebellion, exactly what it sounds like. Where in 1794, there are people in the western part of the country, especially western Pennsylvania, western Virginia, parts of western Maryland, say, no, we're not going to pay this. What does Washington do? What's his response to the Whiskey Rebellion?
He sends in the military.
He sends the federal army, 2,000 strong. Does he ever find anybody? Does anybody ever actually arrested? But it's a power move. He's saying that I am the commander-in-chief of the military. Washington sends troops, and in a Washington government, he will be an enforcer if necessary. He's using his power of commander-in-chief. Okay, so that's at least some of the domestic issues, domestic meaning issues at home, that GW is dealing with. Let's talk about foreign issues. Now, during Washington's term, the French Revolution breaks out. Everybody in France thought that the United States would help. Did France help the United States during the American Revolution?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay? Now, as we know, the French Revolution gets very bloody. Anybody remember the name of the invention? The French Revolution?
The guillotine.
The guillotine. They're named after Dr. Guillotin. By the way, that was actually invented because the thinking was that it was the most kind and humane way to execute someone at that time because it was so fast. Now, why showing the head of someone after that and putting it in a basket is humane, God knows. Regardless, okay? So
The head they put on the pole.
this gets so gory that 40,000 people are publicly executed in the span of 1 year. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe declares war on France, and this has to, you'll learn that in AP World, this has to do with Queen Marie Antoinette. When she died, she was Austrian. Austria declares war on France. The Europe, or Britain especially, will ally with Austria for our purposes. The Federalists say we got to help Britain in this. What does Washington do? The genius of GW. He issues his what? Neutrality Proclamation. So here's what you got to know about that. That was about the French Revolution. So the Neutrality Proclamation. Here's what's great about GW. Did the Constitution say he had a right to do this? Man?
Nah.
I mean, it's an executive order. It's a power move. But it simply said that we will stay out of the French Revolution. Now, let's take this one step further. Do you want the 5 on the AP test level here? After the Neutrality Proclamation of 1793 is proposed, the new French government, the French Republic, sends a gentleman named Edmond Guéné, Citizen Guéné. We know he's from the new French Republic because his title is citizen. And he's going around the country. And he's saying, he speeches to crowds, especially anti-federalists, who really are listening to him, saying, this neutrality proclamation is not what the American people stand for. If you were to re-vote, you would always help France. What does G-Dub do to Citizen Gannett? You don't have to go home, but you got to get up on out of here. He gone. Is that a power move in a way as well? So again, Washington is setting the tone for a president here. That this is not going to be some weak office. This is going to be an office with power if necessary. Not a king, but with power if necessary. We know not a king. You've seen his official portrait. It's up in my room all year long. What color is his suit in that portrait?
Black.
It's a black suit. It's not the color of royalty. He's not holding his sword. He's waving to a pen, meaning this government will respect Enlightenment ideas. And yet, if necessary, does G-Dub prove that a president will step in to handle national affairs?
Yes.
Genius of Washington. Some historians rank him first. Everybody ranks him at least second. And as we know, there's one more tradition on the way out that he establishes. One tradition on the way out that he
Farewell
establishes.
address.
His farewell address. 5 parts. The biggest 2 parts are dealing with political parties and dealing with entangling alliances with other countries. So let's take them one at a time. How does Washington feel about political parties?
Hates them.
Hates them. That's his biggest disappointment of his political career. The political parties, the first 2-party system, by the way, if you see that vocabulary, the first 2-party system are Federalists and JDR, George Washington's time. Okay, we'll get to the second 2-party system tonight as well. The farewell address says, beware of political parties and beware of entangling alliances. Does G-Dub want to get involved with foreign nations?
No.
He's a straight-up isolationist, right? Maybe the most isolationist of all presidents. So he doesn't run. His vice president will win, John Adams. John Adams is a Federalist. And right away, John Adams has an issue. And that issue is that because of the Jay Treaty, at the very end of Washington's term, Adams didn't even negotiate it, the U.S. had made a treaty with Britain. What country is that going to upset right away?
France.
France. So France is sort of teetering on the brink of maybe declaring war, or at the very least, they're not happy. So John Adams sends 3 men, John Marshall being the most important, to go negotiate with France. He recognizes the fact that, yeah, this is definitely a major issue. And these 3 men are interrupted by 3 Frenchmen who want to bribe. We don't even know their names. They simply stand by 3 letters, X, Y, and Z. And so we get the XYZ affair. The minister's name is Talleyrand, who these 3 Americans wanted to talk to, and they never get to talk to. The XYZ affair is where X, Y, and Z bribe the 3 American delegates. Say, in order to talk to Talleyrand, who was the French minister, you've got to pay immediately 250,000 florins. John Marshall becomes a hero. It's how he becomes famous. What does John Marshall tell these 3? No, we're not doing it. Comes back to wild applause. What did the American people want John Adams to declare on France after the XYZ affair? War, right? Will John Adams do it? No, he will not. He knows it's probably going to cost him re-election, right? He knows he's wrecking his political career. But John Adams will not go to war. Now, although that may have cost him his political career, although he does the right thing, by the way, I guess I gave it away. Was that the correct decision to ensure that America is not involved in a war at this point? Too weak of a country to get into a war at this point. It was the correct decision, so well done. However, John Adams is a sensitive man, and he has a Federalist Congress, a Federalist Court, and he gets past the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. Some of you wrote brilliantly on your prompts. I got 1 hour of prompts done. They're good, but they're long, man. You guys did a nice job for the most part, at least the hour that I've read. So this is a good thing, okay? The Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien Acts extended the amount of time it took to become a citizen from 5 years to 14 years. Why? Most immigrants were JDRs because they were the party of the poor, and Federalists didn't want them. The Sedition Acts is a more powerful one. Were the Sedition Acts constitutional at this point? Nope. Neither were the ones in World War I. because they said you cannot be critical of the government. Jefferson and Madison are so mad. These are Federalist laws. Jefferson and Madison are so mad that they write rebuttals called the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions. Here's another set of documents that oftentimes are promised. And it said all states should nullify these two laws. At the time, judicial review had not been set up yet. So maybe states had the right to do this. At the time, in 1799. And these are written by, if you're wondering, okay, these are written by Jefferson and Madison. Jefferson writes the Kentucky one, Madison writes the Virginia one. However, sadly, to their dismay, how many states actually nullify the Alien and Sedition laws?
Ten.
It's on the board. Virginia and Kentucky, 2. That's it, okay? So only 2 out of the 16 states that they had by that point. Okay, let me take a quick look at the vocab. Cabinet Federalist, Elastic Clause, Neutrality Proclamation, Funding and Power, Custom Duties, even Citizen Gannett, good. Judiciary Act of 1783, that doesn't usually show up. Risky Rebellion. Treaty of Greenville, to go back to Native Americans. Anybody remember this is a treaty between the Washington administration and Native Americans. Anybody remember what that treaty said? Or more importantly, what Native American was forced to move because of the Treaty of Greenville?
What specific Native American?
One specific Native American is forced to move.
The prophet.
Tecumseh and the Prophet. Both, so that's 2. Yep. So, now,
Prophet.
the Treaty of Greenville basically gave Native Americans Ohio. Gave the United States Ohio, moved all Native Americans out of Ohio. And the thinking was that if you move out of Ohio and to Indiana, we'll never bother you again. Yeah. LOL. Do we end up taking over Indiana? Do we end up taking over Indian territory that is Oklahoma? Do we have a tepid history with Native Americans in this country?
Yes.
A little bit. Okay, to chapter 11. Those were 2 biggies, so well done. 11's another biggie, and then we can roll a little quicker. Flip the page if you would. Any volunteers to read the summary? I've appreciated the 2 volunteers so far. Any volunteers to read the summary on 11? Don't want to volunteer at once? I'm getting overwhelmed.
I'll do.
Thank you, sir. Go for it.
The ideological conflicts of the early republic culminated in the bitter election of 1800 between Adams and Jefferson. Despite the fierce rhetoric of the campaign, the Revolution of 1800 demonstrated that the infant republic could peacefully transfer power from one party to another. The election of 1800 also signaled the decline of the conservative Federalist Party, which proved unable to adjust to the democratic future of American politics. Jefferson, the political theorist, came to Washington determined to restore what he saw as the original American revolutionary ideals and to implement his Republican principles of limited and frugal government, strict construction, and an anti-militarist foreign policy. But Jefferson, the practical politician, had to compromise many of these goals, thereby moderating the Republican Federalist ideological conflict. The sharpest political conflicts occurred over the judiciary, where John Marshall worked effectively to enshrine the principles of judicial review in a strong federal government. Against his original intentions, Jefferson himself also enhanced federal power by waging war against the Barbary pirates and by his dramatic purchase of Louisiana from Napoleon. The Louisiana Purchase was Jefferson's greatest success, increasing national unity and pointing to America's long-term future in the West. But in the short term, the vast geographic expansion fostered schemes like Aaron Burr's to break the West away from the United States. Nevertheless, Jefferson became increasingly entangled in the horrific European wars between Napoleonic France and Britain, as both great powers obstructed American trade and violated the freedom of the seas. Jefferson attempted to avoid war through his embargo policy, which damaged the American economy and stirred bitter opposition in New England. Jefferson's successor, James Madison, soon stumbled into a diplomatic trap set by Napoleon and Western war hogs hoping to acquire Canada, whip the United States into a war with Britain in 1812. The nation went to war totally unprepared, bitterly divided, and devoid of any coherent strategy.
Okay, let's start with the election of 1800. This is called this the Revolution election. Why was the election of 1800 a revolution? What happened here? Nobody died.
First time political party change.
Yes, it is a peaceful transition of power from the Federalists to the JDRs. It sets the precedent. Jefferson does a good job. It's one of the reasons why he's top 10 and probably always will be of not cleaning house and keeping what worked. So it is a peaceful transition of power. That ends up being key. So the third president becomes Thomas Jefferson. He's the first JDR. There would be 3 JDR presidents. And as president, there are some key events during his presidency that will come up. The Louisiana Purchase, and we'll talk about each of these in a minute. The Louisiana Purchase, and then subsequently Lewis and Clark, their expedition. The same year, Marbury versus Madison. The first major Supreme Court case, and an example of the John Marshall Court, and how Marshall will rule as a Supreme Court justice, or Chief Justice. The Embargo Act of 1807. We know why Jefferson does this. He has his reasoning, but at the same time, it will not do well for the economy, and it will get one area of the country to completely hate the guy. And then, the last part of this chapter, whenever you get to a war, it's causes and consequences. So this one is going to be the causes of the War of 1812. It will be James Madison who will take the country into war, the 4th president. There are 3 reasons why the United States gets into the War of 1812, and 1 region that hates the War of 1812. So that's the chapter. So let's go through it a little bit. First of all, the Louisiana Purchase. What's Jefferson's conundrum? What's his problem with this? This should be a layup. It's the greatest bargain in American history. But what's his problem with it, Grace?
The Constitution doesn't say that the president can buy land.
And Jefferson is an anti-federalist to the core. The Constitution does not specifically say the president can buy land. So what does Jefferson want to do? He said, I've got an idea on how to solve this. If the Constitution doesn't say something, what can you add to the Constitution to make it say something?
Amendment.
An amendment. That's what Jefferson wants. Why can't he get an amendment? It has nothing to do with anyone in this country.
Federalist.
Say it again, Abby.
Won't pass in time.
It won't pass in time. Because who's in a rush for the money?
Napoleon.
Napoleon. He wants to use the money for his foreign wars. So, basically Napoleon says, you got a month, pal. Does Jefferson decide to do this? Of course he does. More importantly, it flips the switch. The anti-federalists are in favor for this because this is more anti-federalist land. Because it's going to be farmers. The Federalists are dead set against this. So what are you doing? Because they knew that their party was becoming regional.
Wait, Timur, at this point, was it JDR or was it still anti-federalist?
Good question. So it's specifically JDR. I'm using the terms interchangeably, and I probably shouldn't. But the party's specifically Federalists and Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans.
Okay.
It's a great question. Now, then Jefferson goes one step further. He funds the Lewis and Clark expedition. This is funded with federal dollars. It's 2 years, 1804 to 1806. Now, why am I bringing this up? 2 reasons. It is Jefferson acting like a Federalist, and that's important, and that's nice. But here's the other thing. Lewis and Clark is your contextualization for what? What movement does Lewis and Clark begin? The movement that the United States feels it should go all the way to the West Coast.
Great
What am I saying
migration.
here? Manifest destiny. Okay? The idea that so again, Lewis and Clark is your contextualization for manifest destiny. The idea that America just simply has a God-given right to go from sea to shining sea. Okay, let's move on. Marbury versus Madison. Why do we care? There's 2 main reasons. What's one reason?
Judicial review.
Judicial review, which means only the what branch of government can take a law out of circulation?
Judicial.
The Supreme Court. Very good. So, Marbury versus Madison establishes judicial review. Which means only the Supreme Court can nullify laws, take laws out of circulation. Same thing. For the 5 on the AP test answer, these Virginia and Kentucky resolutions that said that all states should nullify the Alien and Sedition Act, Marbury v. Madison cancels this. Equals cancel. People have said that my lanyard should be canceled because it's the old Cleveland Indians. They're now the Guardians. The Indians is not politically correct. So, cancel culture. Marbury v. Madison said that no state can nullify a federal law. So the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions become obsolete. Let's go back to Marbury versus Madison. Is this a Federalist or an anti-Federalist decision? Who would prefer that?
Federalist.
Federalist. Strengthens the power of the federal government. Anytime you see John Marshall and a decision by him, it's going to strengthen the power of the federal government.
Wasn't he the head of the Supreme Court?
Chief Justice. In fact, his nickname becomes the last what?
Federalist.
Federalist, because he outlives the party. He's the Chief Justice from the time of early Jefferson through the era of good feelings and actually early Jackson. He doesn't die until 1834. He hangs on for dear life. John Marshall. Now, the Embargo Act of 1807. At this time, the Napoleonic Wars were going on. France was fighting England. Okay? Instead of getting involved, Jefferson recognized the U.S. can't afford a war. He passes the Embargo Act of 1807. What does this do to trade in the country?
It goes bye-bye.
Gets rid of it.
Embargo means it cancels all trade. So all trade in the country stops. He's doing this because Britain and France are the largest trading partners in the country at the time. And if you cancel that trade, well, the thinking was we're just going to bury our heads in the sand and not worry about it. Now, is this popular? Well, let me reword this. Let me ask a better question. What region of the country absolutely hated the
North.
Embargo Act?
Or south, no.
What region? Let me ask again. What region of the country hates the Embargo Act?
No.
New England. Why would New England hate it? Because where's the manufacturing in the country? Do they need to trade with other countries? There you go. So this makes New England hate Jefferson. They're also Federalists. So New England hates this. And yet, again, 5 on the AP test. This will start the Industrial Revolution in America. Here's why. What do Americans have to do now with goods? Make them themselves. They're not importing anything. So goods have to be made on their own. So in a way, the Embargo Act fuels the market revolution or starts it.
Wait, Timur, isn't that like the opposite of what Jefferson wanted?
You know it, my friend. It's a paradox. Because under him, Jefferson thought, as president, he thought the ideal American was the yeoman farmer. And most Americans were a farmer at that time. Okay? That was his thinking. Well done. Now, go for it, Sabrina.
Why wasn't the South as upset either? Because like Jamie's not.
I mean, a little bit. But here's why they're not upset. They're agricultural. They're not industrial. So much of their goods at the time were sold in the United States, and Jefferson's a Southerner. So he stands for them, you see. All right, let's move to 1812. Why did we get into the War of 1812? What are the causes of this? What's one reason?
Britain and Canada.
Okay, so there's one. Britain they don't leave their forts. The British refuse to leave their forts in the Great Lakes. What's the number one tourist attraction in Michigan? Mackinac Island. That's a fort that the British didn't leave. Britain stays in the Great Lakes. What's another reason? What are the British doing to American soldiers? Impressing them. Forcing them into the British Navy. Britain will not stop impressment. Impressment of Americans into the British Navy. And then finally, what's Britain doing to Native Americans in the West? They're giving them something. What are they giving them?
Guns.
Guns. They won't stop giving them guns. They give the natives weapons. So James Madison, a JDR, feels he has no choice. And he declares war. What region hates the War of 1812?
New England.
New England. Because their number one trading partner is Britain. They're manufacturing. They trade with Britain. And now they can't because they're at war. Okay. All right, let's do one more chapter and then we'll take a pause here. So flip to chapter 12, the era of good feelings.
Key terms, Timor. For 11.
Oh, key terms, thank you. Legend of 1800, Midnight Judges. Yes, it shows up sometimes. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's the gift that John Adams leaves. He appoints several justices who were there for life. John Marshall, we talked about, Marbury v. Madison, Lewis and Clark, Embargo Act of 1807. Don't worry about the Non-Intercourse Act. Impressment of Americans, one of the causes of the War of 1812. Tecumseh, Native American, who is, his home is burned by the Americans in the Battle of Tippecanoe because the prophet won't listen to him. And the War of 1812, which American region was against it, and why? The North, because of their trading partners. Yes, sir. Sure, yeah. So, 10, Cabinet, we're good there. Cabinet Federalist, Anti-Federalist, we talked about them.
I feel like everything's for 10.
Neutral XYZ affair, funding at par. The only one I wouldn't worry about on 10 is the Judiciary Act of 1789. And 9, we covered all of those except maybe the Great Compromise, which was how the legislature was established. Okay, flip to 12, the era of good feelings. For time's sake, I'll pick someone, unless I have a volunteer right away. Well, all right, I'll go for it, Tessa. And I know I hate being voluntold things as well. But chapter summary, please, on 12.
Americans began the War of 1812 with high hopes of conquering Canada, but their strategy of conquering was very flawed. So were badly flawed. And before long, 26 Canadian forces had joined the United States on the defense. The Americans fared somewhat better in naval warfare, but by 1814 the British had burned Washington. The British had
You're right, they burned Washington, the capital of Washington. The city.
and were threatening New Orleans. The Treaty of Ghent ended the war in a stalemate that solved none of the original issues. But America counted the war as a success and increasingly turned away from European affairs and toward isolation. Despite some sectionism taught by New Englanders at the Hartford Convention, the ironic outcome of the divisive war was a strong surge of American nationalism and unity. Political conflict virtually disappeared during the era of good feelings under President Madison. A fervent new nationalism appeared in diverse areas of culture, economics, and foreign policy. The era of good feelings was soon threatened by the Panic of 1819, caused largely by excessive land speculation and unstable rates. An even more serious threat came from the first major sectional dispute over slavery, which was postponed but not really resolved by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Under Chief Justice John Marshall, the Supreme Court further enhanced its role as major force upholding a powerful national government and conservative defense of property rights. Marshall's rulings partially checked the general movement towards states' rights and popular democracy. Nationalism also led to a more assertive American foreign policy. Andrew Jackson's military adventures in Spanish Florida resulted in the secession of the territory to the United States. American fears of European intervention in Latin America encouraged Monroe and John Quincy Adams to lay down the Monroe Doctrine.
Who wins the War of 1812?
Nobody.
No one. But who celebrates like they won the War of 1812?
U.S.
We beat the British. We beat the British. The British go home. Okay? So the Treaty of Ghent is a truce. And after, 2 weeks after the Treaty of Ghent is the Battle of New Orleans. Now why do we care about the Battle of New Orleans? Because of the general who was in control
Andrew Jackson.
at the Battle of New Orleans. This is where who burst onto the scene as an American hero?
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. And naturally, Andrew Jackson surprised the British at New Orleans with his 7,000 troops waiting for the British to come ashore, and it is a major American victory in January of 1815. Well, isn't that cute? But the war was already over. The British had quit 2 weeks before. So why did this battle even exist? Well, it took about 6 weeks for communication at the time to get over the Atlantic Ocean, so nobody knew. So how did America celebrate? We beat the British, we beat the British. And this will start, as we all know, the era of what?
Good feeling.
Good feelings. And we'll get to what that means in a minute. But first, the beginning of the era of good feelings, we have to talk about the Hartford Convention. Hartford is important in this case. Hartford is in New England. Okay? And it is a grouping of delegates from New England states. They're all Federalists, and they have a list of complaints. They want a one-term president. They want a constitutional amendment needed if there's going to be an embargo, because they want that 3/4 majority of the states to be able to pass something like that they know they'll never get. Well, this gets to Washington at the same time as news of the Battle of New Orleans. So the Hartford Convention folks are looked at as unpatriotic. How dare you criticize the country that beat the British? Shame on you. And the Hartford Convention will lead directly to the death of what political party?
Federalists.
Yes. This is the end of the Federalist Party. And you get the era of good feelings president, who is James Monroe. He is the last JDR president. Third and final, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, the last JDR president. And there's a newspaper reporter, actually, who, when James Monroe goes to visit New England, says our president, even though he's a Southerner, has ushered in a new era of good feelings, which will last for 5 years, and Andrew Jackson will single-handedly kill. But it goes from 1816 to 1825. Now, two major things happen in the era of good feelings, with the exception of course, this is a time of very high national pride. Uniquely #America. That was the DDQ last year, so it won't be this year. Right? National identity in the building national identity in the era of good feelings. He has two things during his presidency that we got to talk about: the Missouri Compromise and the Monroe Doctrine. First of all, the Missouri Compromise. How does it start? Well, Missouri wants to enter as a slave state. So what? What's the problem?
It would upset the balance.
Right, it will upset the balance of power. So, this is where we introduce the 3 strikes and you're out theory. Because by 1819, the South had lost the House of Representatives. Why? Why did the North have the House of Representatives by 1819? They had a higher what?
Population.
Population. The House is based on population. Because of this, okay, the South would have been fine with Missouri being added as a slave state. They said that's only fair. We're going to get this. We should have the Senate because the House the North has. But the North says, not so fast, my friends. And what state comes in to keep that balance of power?
Maine.
Maine. So the Missouri Compromise says that Maine will come in as a free state. Missouri will come in as a slave state. And then you have this 36-degree, 30-minute line that says anything south of there can be slave, anything north of there can be free in the Louisiana Purchase. It maintains the balance of power in the Senate. The Senate remains equal, much to the South's chagrin, but they figure, well, equal is better than losing it. We also, at the Missouri Compromise, a national politician bursts on the scene with this. Who am I thinking of here? Who writes it?
Henry Clay.
Henry Clay. The greatest politician never to be president alone. Now, question. Does the Missouri Compromise solve the problem of slavery forever and ever and ever?
Nope.
No, it just prolongs it. It kicks the can down the road. But it does become a trusted law. and it will be around for 34 years. The other major piece of legislation during the era of good feelings is the Monroe Doctrine. This is a foreign policy document that says that the Western Hemisphere is closed to colonization, and it says any attack on the Western Hemisphere could be seen as an attack on America. What is this actually designed to do? It's telling Europe what? Stay out. Doesn't work. It does work. There is no European war from the War of 1812 to the Spanish-American War. So 1812 to 1898, 86 years. It does work. But this is a step from Washington's isolationism because it says that #America has arrived, that we are the big dog in the Western Hemisphere. Ruff, 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 ruff. The Tigers have a player now, and I hate to bring them up because they're 2-8, and I don't think they would be 500 in AAA, but they have a player who barks in the clubhouse all the time. He calls himself Wolfie, Nick Mayton. So with that, let's take a little bit of a pause, huh? So, need pictures, take pictures, okay? We'll roll a little quicker on the next 4 or 5 because they're not quite as in-depth. This is a lot of heavy legislative chapters. Let's take a pause, we'll come back in 10 minutes. What kind of trouble are you causing over there? Yeah, of course, no, yeah, you do. Please.
Carson,
We'll come back in 10 minutes.
No, did Ryan see that?
Jason's ready to have to hold up the lights.
Point to it.
Okay, and then for 12.
Wait, I actually look here. You just know my
Sedition. And the Alien Act stretched the law.
I'm so sorry.
What year is it? 97. What's that, Jason? Carry my right here.
I almost walked in front of the
Right,
camera.
let's stay on the ground.
Because then I'll be watching the video.
Yeah, we're just staying right. Point taken. I didn't hear the G. Maybe because I'm so G on the post.
I used to love Max Preston's car.
She's long, take it easy.
Wait, hold on. Same.
We'll start again in about 6 minutes. This will roll a little quicker. Those are heavy, in-depth, involved chapters. Taylor used to say those chapters lay the foundation for the whole class.
But I'm not telling anyone.
How much time do we have? Like 10 minutes?
About 6 minutes. 7 minutes.
So we're playing tomorrow.
6 minutes, group. 6 minutes. We'll start again.
I read it. So like you said, does it show that I just keep
Dude. Everybody's moving, team. I didn't look at the board. Whatever you
They
said.
moved there, yeah.
Whatever you, I just, like, I type it as you said it.
They migrate. Well, and that's part of it. I have not perfected, you know, how to maximize the use of this room. And people have said, well, you know, just type sit here and type and project it up on the screen. I don't know if I can do that fast.
This is the best way.
So, I mean, this way, even if I put it up on a screen, yeah, I can put it in the Google Classroom, but this way, the visual stays, you can take a picture.
Right.
And I want to see the progression, so I try. Like so many other things, I'm not perfect.
No, but.
5 minutes, group is done, we're starting in 5 minutes. 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Like my brother has 5 minutes. You want me to pick it up? Anything you want to draw?
Timo, what do you think the Lions are going to do at pick 6 now that we traded Okuda?
You know, they're talking ahead and looking, who I know they want to get
If you keep drawing, I guess.
they might be forced to take him to his team.
No,
Because I think they see him as the quarterback for Jared Goff's contract. And I agree, I like Hendon Hooker a lot. I know he's older, but the number one thing, Tom Brady too, the number one thing about NFL quarterbacks is like the league. And you guys are doing something. So I think it's 6 that they want to move up. I feel like they want to move Rams.
like my friends like got out of the pictures there when I was there. And like her and my friends like went out and I was like, we're all back. I was gonna maybe because I go right by my house, but I was like, whatever, it's fine. Like nothing just happened.
And to me, that's too long. But we'll see. You know, 2 in the morning, 2 minutes. I mean, Brad Holmes,
Where's my pen?
never had his press.
Oh, do I get
Can he keep doing it? I think that Jeff McCrew trade is a damning indictment of how they felt about the talent.
Jeff Okuda. That was interesting.
Oh, I was going to.
What was it, like a 5th round? Yeah, 5th round.
Oh, wait, can I show you what I did?
I mean, that's basically like saying, hey, I'm busting you right the hell out.
He did better last year.
You know, he has the game.
No corners from Ohio State are ever good.
I know I do like the first one. I'm like, I'm good. It's just
What's his name? Apple. Yeah. Yeah.
literally from the first one that he was up, and I'm like, done. Yeah, like if he's like, okay, work on it. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. The first one, which is always the easiest one.
So I actually.
2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes.
I should put the date on this. I don't know what I got.
That's the right answer.
Alright, where's my...
And then this is the right answer.
Oh, I got one to find. Oh, I said you can't I don't think so. My dad changed this to me the other day. Since you drive the van more than anyone else, you can have me to work. What? You know. Yeah, those two. It's a really dumb code.
You got snacks, bro?
Huh?
You got snacks?
No.
It's alright.
Can I have that? Oh, wait. You got to eat what? You guys kind of got mad. Now it's on the like, you got mad at me? I wanted to pack a lunch, so I think my brother's also a picture. And then I wanted to pack a lunch, I went back to your house. Like, I'm not either, I'm just like, but it's used well. Like, it used to be like an issue. Like, I get lunch, like, 10 out of 5 is a great dinner, then you just smell that, they didn't smell, you can wash it down. Anti-Walmart. Nobody actually tells me that he used to do it. And they smell them and things. When you say it again, it's not. Yeah, I don't know. It was a whole
Why is FDR?
It was a lot of like, you at least watch it. My dad, he was like,
9 seconds, 9 seconds.
I know, I'm like, actually, some of those are like, but I've never been in really like that.
She talked about it. She took me for
Line in the space dive. Oh yeah, no, ours is just but we just saved that in my computer. What? You know when you go maybe right there with quarter?
I don't really like it. I don't really like it.
Next to the kid, you got a door in the kitchen.
It's not even that.
10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's time to start games. Mary Sheen's hitting people. Just saying. So, I mean, you know, he was so physically violent and whatnot. So, as it's time to start games, Mary Sheen was hitting people. So, you know, so it's time to start. All right, so back. I'll go to Emily Brown this time, and I know voluntold sucks, but chapter 13 summary, just the first 4 paragraphs, please. So on 13, we're going to focus on just the first 4 paragraphs, so you'll end where it says the Trail of Tears. This chapter is about one of the most polarizing figures in all of American history, Andrew Jackson. Polarizing means that you love him or you hate him, but you probably have an opinion on the man. So, we'll get to the second 2-party system of the Democrats and the Whigs in a second. But first, let's talk about Andrew Jackson. Let's focus on the positives. There are 3 very distinct positives that Jackson had. Start with 1, Daniel.
Power to the common man.
He brings the common man into politics for the first time. People like me have a say in the federal government. You want data? Before Jackson, about 25% of Americans voted. That's just the way the Founding Fathers wanted it. After Jackson, about 80% of Americans voted. That's his biggest positive. That is why he will never be ranked terribly low, because the regular folk get to play politics thanks to Andrew Jackson. There are 2 other positives of Jackson's presidency. Anybody have one that they can think of? Positives, yep. It's how he handles a certain situation.
The nullification crisis.
Yeah, very good. The nullification crisis of South Carolina. How he handles South Carolina's nullification threat. And here's what this is over. The tariffs of 1828, 1832. Basically, they're the highest tariffs in American history to that point. Until the Great Depression. We're looking now at the highest tariff of American history for reals. But the tariff spike, and South Carolina, being a southern state, says we're going to nullify that tariff. Does any state by 1832 have the right to nullify a federal law?
No.
No.
Because of
Marbury versus
versus Madison. And Andrew Jackson takes a page from George Washington and says, hell no. If I have to, I'll send troops down to South Carolina and I'll hang every one of them nullifiers. Knowing what you know about Jackson, do you think he would have done it?
Yes.
Yes.
With glee and pride. But Henry Clay says, cool it, man. Relax. And they get a compromise passed. The compromise lowers the tariff and gives the president the force bill, which allows the president to send troops if necessary. The other positive, and this is the hardest one typically for students to come up with, he does strengthen the office of the presidency. Nullification crisis. And he does this with these vetoes. Before him, the first 6 presidents, 10 vetoes. Anybody remember how many vetoes Jackson has all by himself?
Like 20.
21.
Not you're thinking of Johnson. 12. Yep. He vetoes 12 laws.
Wait, Johnson had 21 too?
He did, yep. Sir veto. 15 of the Congress said, whatever. And now for Jackson's negatives. And there are at least 3. We probably should list 4, but I'll be kind to the man and list 3. What's one of the negatives of Andrew? Go for it, Sabrina. The Trail of Tears, the Indian Removal Act, absolutely. Now, we need a couple of things here. John Marshall is still the Supreme Court Chief Justice. In 2 cases, Cherokee Nation v. Georgia and Worcester v. Georgia, did John Marshall say that the Native Americans could stay?
Yes.
Yes. Does Jackson care about that?
No.
Mr. Marshall has made his ruling, let him enforce it. And all of the Native Americans east of the Mississippi are forced to Indian territory. Now, this goes against the Supreme Court. Now, why does Jackson think he's doing the Native Americans a favor by removing this? He really thinks that this is a positive. Why does he think he's doing the Native Americans a favor because of this? Go for it, Carson.
Doesn't he think that if he moves them, they won't have to be moved again?
Yes! He thinks that we're never going to need this. They've got their home forever. Well, the Indian Territory is Oklahoma, and, well, let's spoil the surprise. Are we going to have to move the Native Americans again? And the next move is the saddest of all, to the reservation system. Good. Okay, excellent. That's one clear negative. What's another clear negative? Go for it, Anissa. He personally kills the skeleton timber. The second Bank of the United States. It's killed by 1836, which starts all by himself, the Panic of 1837. And in fact, he adds to it his last law that he passes, Specie Circular, which says all payment must be made in gold and silver. Farmers don't have gold and silver. The panic gets even worse. Should he have killed the Bank of the United States?
No.
No, the bank worked for people. You see? Absolutely not. And the third negative. This third negative will eventually cost the president his life. Daniel, go ahead.
Spoil system.
The spoil system. Giving people jobs based on loyalty instead of talent. The spoil system in American politics lasts from 1825, Andrew Jackson, until 1881, when President Garfield loses his life. More on that when we get to the Gilded Age. So, two-party system. The second two-party system is caused by Andrew Jackson himself. Jackson causes this. Not only does he end the era of good feelings, he causes the second two-party system. People who support him, well, I'll ask you, supporters of Jackson, were they Democrats or were they Whigs?
Democrats.
They're the Democrats. He starts the party. These are often living in rural areas. These are often poor folk. These are often the South and West. It's the party of the what?
Common man.
Common man. And Jackson loves it. Jackson would often misspell memos because he didn't really care to get them spell checked. Who is the leader of the Whigs?
Henry Clay.
Henry Clay, Jackson's nemesis. They hate each other. And Henry Clay has a very simple three-part plan that he calls the American system. And that becomes the Whig Party platform. And it is a strong national bank, a high tariff, and funding for internal improvements, bridges and roads. This is the party of the urban wealthy elite. Okay. That's the chapter. Let's take a look at the,
Wait, Tim,
yeah,
when does, after Federalist dies, the Whigs just started up just by Clay out of nowhere?
Jackson causes it. Because what happens is that this lasts from 1825 to 1852. It will end with Henry Clay's death. People who like Jackson begin calling themselves Jacksonian Democrats. People who don't like Jackson call themselves Whigs because they say we're the true patriots, just like the Whig Party was during the American Revolution.
I got you.
That's where that comes from. Here or there? Rural areas. It says, actually says rural R's. No, it says rural areas. Spelling tip. It's a nice thing. Okay, let's see here. The key terms. Democrats versus Whigs for sure. If you see John C. Calhoun, he is the head of the nullification crisis. If you see that name. Spoil system. Indian Removal Act. Cherokee cases were simply saying that the natives could stay. Henry Clay, leader of the Whigs. Second Bank, the Panic. Specie Circular we talked about, and the Common Man. All right, let's fight the market revolution. Flip the page. Once she's ready, we'll go to Sophie, and we'll talk chapter summary on chapter 14, the market revolution.
The youthful American Republic expanded dramatically on the frontier in the early 19th century. Frontier life was often crude and hard on the pioneers, especially women. Westward moving pioneers often ruthlessly exploited the environment, exhausting the soil and exterminating wildlife. Yet the wild beauty of the West was valued as a symbol of American national identity, and eventually environmentalists would create the national park system to preserve pieces of the wilderness. Other changes altered the character of American society and its workforce. Older cities expanded and new cities sprang up in the wilderness. Irish and German immigrants poured into the country in the 1930s and 1830s and 1840s. The Irish, in particular, aroused nativist hostility because of their Roman Catholic faith. Inventions and business innovations such as free incorporation laws spurred economic growth. Women and children were often were most exploited early factory laborers. Though workers made some gains in wages and hours, but generally failed in using unionization attempts. The most far-reaching economic advantages before the Civil War occurred in agriculture and transportation. The early railroads, despite many obstacles, gradually spread their tentacles across the country. Foreign trade remained only in a small part of the American economy, but changing technology gradually created growing economic links to Europe. By the early 1860s, the telegraph, railroad, and steamship had gone far forward, replacing older means of travel and communication such as canals, clipper ships, stagecoach, and pony express. The new means of transportation and distribution laid the foundations for a continental market economy. The new national economy created a pattern of sectional specialization and altered the traditional economy functions of the family. There was growing concern over the class differences spawned by industrialization, especially in the cities. But the general growth of opportunities and the increased standard of living made America a magnet land of opportunity to many people at home and abroad.
Very well done, that's a long one. So what was the market revolution? It is the transfer, first of all, it's 1790 to 1860. Some call it the first industrial revolution, and it's partially that. But the market revolution is the transfer of the economy from making goods in the home, almost everything, to going to market to get goods. Hence the first industrial revolution. Okay? So, it also regionalizes the country into the north, the south, and the west. What's happening in the north during the market revolution?
Railroads.
Okay, railroads are being built, and the north is slowly starting to embrace what kind of system? In industry, or and you make things in where? A factory. So it's beginning to embrace the factory system, right? So yes, they're going to have more railroads than anywhere else, and this is going to be the area of factories. America's first industry is the what type of factories?
Textile.
Textile.
Textile, make clothes. What's happening in the South at this time? Is the South industrializing?
No.
Absolutely not. The South will remain agricultural, and it is in this time, because of the economic marriage between the North and the South at this time, that you get, instead of tobacco, rice, and indigo, like we talked about in colonial America, what's going to become the number one crop in the South?
Cotton.
Cotton. You dare not wage war on cotton, cotton is king. And cotton will be shipped to northern factories, and it also gets shipped to Britain for their textile factories. The West, this is not California yet. We haven't entered California into the Union. The West at this time means Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Missouri to a lesser extent. What's going on in the West? Okay? So there is an important connection. We said we built railroads in the north. They're actually connecting to the west because what's going on in the west? Go for it, Tim.
Oh, no, it's just.
Okay. What's going on, Carson? What's going on? What's that?
Gold?
Not yet. We're a little early. Good guess. We're a little early. California gold comes a little later. So what's going on in the west? Railroads, but why? What's getting shipped? What am I thinking of?
Grain.
What's that?
Grain.
Grain and corn. This is becoming the bread basket. This is grain factories and corn factories. What's the name of the reaper that will be made in Chicago?
The
for a reason? What am I
McCormick.
thinking of there?
McCormick.
The McCormick reaper. That's an invention of this time. Let's talk about inventions of the market revolution. We'll start with that factory system. That is an invention. 1791, who was the British dude who immigrates to the United States in order to basically give the plans away to the factory system. I'm thinking of a name. What's the name of that dude?
Whitney.
Nope, Whitney is in it. We'll get to him in a minute. But who was that Italian? Samuel Slater. An Italian blowing from the corner for three, and it's good swish. Well done. This factory will be in Rhode Island. I say that because it's a northern area. I also like the name Eli Whitney. He has two key inventions of the market revolution. Some would argue the two most important. What's one of those inventions that Eli Whitney has?
Cotton.
Interchangeable.
Cotton gin and interchangeable parts. We got them both. Good. Cotton gin will sadly save slavery. Interchangeable parts will transfer right into the factory system because it makes the machines uniform. Okay, another invention, we mentioned the railroads, which we'll put down here in transportation. We'll get to that. We mentioned the McCormick reaper, revolutionizing farming in the West. There's a couple other inventions of the market revolution that we have to mention. What's the revolution in communication during the market revolution?
Telegraph.
Telegraph, right? Too early for the telephone, but certainly the telegraph. Instant communication for the first time develops the idea of credit. Okay? Let's see. What about if you have textile factories? What kind of machines do you have to make textiles? Oh, I've stumped you.
Sewing machine.
Yeah, the sewing machine. Yeah. This is actually a market revolution invention as well. All right, I think we got the biggies there. Let's go down to transportation. And there are quite a few. But railroads are the last one. And the railroads will connect the north and the west. What area of the country does not embrace railroads?
South.
South, right?
It's a steamboat.
Less than 20% of the railroads will be in the South. Why do we care? Will that hurt the South when we get to the Civil War? Does that hurt the South when we get to the
Extremely.
Civil War? Absolutely, right? Okay? I heard steamboat, which comes before railroads. Railroads are 1830s. The steamboat is 1807. And it was revolutionary in its own way because it could go against the current, right? You didn't need the current anymore, so that's something. You go against the current. What area will say the steamboat is all we need, quite frankly?
South.
The South, right? The South will get addicted to this. They think this is all that's needed. Couple of the transportation revolution. What's the largest canal ever built in the United States?
The
Still New York.
Erie
What am I
Canal.
thinking of there?
Erie Canal?
The Erie Canal is built. It's built with all state money, no federal dollars. JDR president said no. And it will connect. There's New York City. That's the Hudson River. It connects Albany to Buffalo, which is here, which means Lake Erie. Okay? And I know that map is really small, but basically, are there several place names in Michigan that are named after places in New York?
Yes.
Yeah, because of the Erie Canal. Okay? It opens up the West. And canals have their heyday until railroads make them obsolete. This will open up, not Lopez. This will open up the West, including where we are right now, Michigan. Rochester, Michigan is named after Rochester, New York. Okay.
When was the Erie Canal built?
Erie Canal is finished and opens in 1825. It starts being built in 1817. Takes 8 years. All with state money. No federal money is taken at all. All right, let's look at the key terms. Oh, Emily Nash. She's cute. She's this 8-year-old girl who moves from Connecticut to Ohio, right? Oh, I do have one big miss here. What's going on with women at this time?
Cult of domesticity.
Cult of domesticity. They're staying home. I would have got it in the next chapter. And what was the name of these young girls who work in the factories in the north?
Lowell girls.
Close. Not Lewis, but
Lowell.
Lowell girls. By the way, these Lowell girls, they enjoy the work for a little while, but after 6 months, what happens to the Lowell girls?
Quit.
They get bored. A lot of them quit. Yep. Is factory work hard?
No. Yes.
I mean, it's maybe not hard. Maybe that's a bad question. Can it be boring?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Commonwealth versus Massachusetts. Don't worry about Sam Slater. Railroads, canals, cult of domesticity. Got that. McCormick Reaper. I could certainly add the steel plow underneath. Another invention that revolutionized farming. These are farming inventions.
John Deere.
Yeah, that's who invented the steel plows. What the company's named after.
What about immigrants, Timor? Nothing about that.
Oh. This is also the time of old immigrants. Thank you. The first wave of immigrants in the country, old immigrants, and that is what two types of immigrants? Where do they come from? German and Irish. Which one are poorer, the Irish or the German?
Irish.
Yep. Thank you, and I apologize about missing that. Good catch. All right, we'll do 15 and 17. 16 we actually skipped when we were going through it. I was going to go over it a little bit, but you'll be okay. It's on slavery. We get it in other places. So it's not something I'm too worried about. So we'll do 15 and 17, and we should be able to finish right on time for a nice smooth landing. We'll go to Lila Ackridge. Lila, if you would please handle the chapter summary on 15. We can do everything except the last very short paragraph.
In early 19th century America, movements of moral and religious reform accompanied the deunification of politics and the creation of a national market economy. After a period of growing rationalism in religion, a new wave of revivals beginning about 1800 thrust out of the West an effective great change, not only in religious life school movement mainstream, while a few women made their way into still tradition-bound colleges. Women were also prominent in movements for improved treatment of the mentally ill, peace, temperance, and other causes. By the 1840s, some women also began to advocate for their own rights, including suffrage. The movement for women's rights, closely linked to anti-slavery crusades, gained adherence even while it met strong obstacles and vehement opposition. While many reformers worked to improve society as a whole, others created utopian experiments to model their religious and social ideals. Some of these groups promoted racial, sexual, and economic doctrines, while others appealed to high-minded intellectuals and artists. American culture was still quite weak in theoretical sciences and the fine arts, but a vigorous national literature blossomed after the War of 1812 with the works of Washington, Irving, and James Cooper. In New England, the literary resistance encouraged truly American literature and was closely linked to the philosophy of transcendentalism promoted by Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller, the editor of the Dial. Many of great American writers, such as Walt Whitman, reflected the national spirit of utopian optimism, but a few dissenters, such as Hawthorne and Melville, explored the darker side of life and of their own society.
This is about the Second Great Awakening in big capital letters and a little bit about transcendentalism. Okay? First of all, Second Great Awakening. Go back to church. And what are we going to create?
Perfect
Perfect
society.
world.
Let's create a perfect society on planet Earth. It's led by middle and upper class women. Why?
Women?
Yeah, why is it led by middle class and upper class women? They have the time for it due to the cult of domesticity. Very good. Due to the cult of domesticity. Very good. Out of this movement will come 9 reforms. Let's see how many we can get. What's one thing that comes out of this? Temperance. Very good. That was Abby Novak, I think? Yeah. Good. There's one.
Abolition.
That's the biggest. Abolition.
Suffrage.
Women's suffrage. I love what we're doing here. That's 3.
Prohibition.
Well, prohibition is going to go under temperance. So yes, but I heard education reform, public schools for the masses. Things like the McGuffey Reader. Things like Horace Mann. I had a student go to Boston over midwinter break. It was like, Timor, I actually saw something on Horace Mann, and I knew what they were talking about. I'm like, well, good, I did something, perhaps. Go ahead, Doug.
Prison.
Yes, prison and mental health services. Very good. So, let's see, prison. When we think prison and mental health services reform, what name should come to mind? Dorothea Diggs, right? Good. She's a great complexity point for many different reform movements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 more. Very good. New religions. Like the Mormons. Like the Methodists, which was around but expanded. Like the Baptists. 2 more. One has to do with, I don't want to give it away. One has to do with building a perfect society on planet Earth.
Oh, utopia.
Utopian societies where people actually move away and try and build those perfect societies. They remove themselves from their own society. Brook Farm. Henry David Thoreau does this. Brook Farm is an example. Not that Thoreau goes to Brook Farm, he goes to Walden Pond. We'll get to transcendentalism in a minute. Okay? And the other one that we're missing, you might remember that I brought you in graham crackers. Diet reform. People start looking at what they called clean eating at that time. That term is still around with us. Some of you eat rather clean. You know I eat clean because I drink 4 Mountain Dews a day and that has citric acid and orange juice in it. Yeah. And that's basically the chapter, but we got to add some names and some events. First of all, we need to add the Seneca Falls Convention. And they write a document at Seneca Falls called the Declaration of Sentiments. We hold these truths to be self-evident that who are created equal. All men and women are created equal. When we think Seneca Falls, what's a name or name that comes to mind? What's a name, women, what's a name or name that comes to mind?
Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, you could use Lucy Stone, all of them would work well. You want the 5 on the AP test, these two women, Stone and Stanton, get the idea for this because they attend the World Abolition Conference in London in 1840, and they get all the way to London, and what happens to them?
They can't go in
They can't go in. Why can't they go in?
because they're women.
Because they're women. And they say, not fair. And what do they want? Not only total equality, but they want suffrage. The right to vote. This is 1848. Good news. Will women eventually get the right to vote? In 1920, damn it! 72 years later. Okay? When sadly, all 3 of these women are dead. So, grossly, this takes 72 years, but it's the start of the movement. Okay? Another name I want to give you. When it comes to education reform, I mentioned Horace Mann. He's the one that designs the public school system, first for Massachusetts. It gets copied. Anybody remember the name of the guy who wrote those readers, those textbooks? They're named after him.
McGuffey.
Good. So if you see McGuffey readers, that's the textbooks. So William McGuffey was his name. And then one more, the one that's still around with us in the name anyway. Who writes the first American? Yeah, excellent. Webster, right? He writes the dictionary. Can you argue Noah Webster is critical to American national identity? It's the way we speak, man. He's the first one to Americanize the English language. That's also an education reform out of the Second Great Awakening. This house is at Greenfield Village because of that. And now, transcendentalism. Emerson, if you see Emerson, he is a national identity guy because he is saying that America can stand on its own, uniquely American. Mrs. Monteith, what did we associate Emerson with? What phrase?
Independence.
Yeah, independence, right. That's kind of what I was looking for, right? Self-reliance was actually what I was hoping somebody would come up with. Self-reliance. We don't need England. We don't need anybody. We can be uniquely American. And then Thoreau. Thoreau, nonviolent direct action. Thoreau removes himself. What's the phrase Ms. Monteith used for Thoreau? What do we identify him with?
The woods.
Yeah, nature, right? You know, like the idea of removing yourself. Civil disobedience was what I was looking for. But maybe she didn't use that with you this year. It wasn't? Okay. Civil disobedience. Basically, if it's an unjust law, you do not have to follow it. Now, transcendentalism is romantic and spiritual. This comes up often. The Enlightenment is not. The Enlightenment is scientific. You have to be able to touch it, taste it. Not that both are fine, but they're very different. They are contrasts. So there's a shift in the Second Great Awakening away from the scientific. Not that we get rid of our governmental system, we never do that, but we add to it the romantic, the spiritual. Okay? So that comes up fairly often. That's the chapter. Well, I wrote Second Great Awakening big enough that maybe you could read it. Well, that's not bad. Okay, I'll give you a minute. We're going to do one more chapter. Chapter 17, which is the Manifest Destiny chapter. Our friend James K. Polk, one of my favorite presidents because nobody remembers him, and yet in one term he gets done everything he said he was going to get done. So, let's see. The last reader of the night. Who shall be lucky enough to be the last reader of the night? Blake Burry, take us home, man. Please, the summary on 17.
Has Tyler seen the tragedy of the Harrison's death in the United States?
I'm sorry, Blake, start again. My fault, not yours. I wasn't ready.
What?
I said start again. I wasn't ready.
Oh, okay. As Tyler assumed the presidency after Harrison's death, the United States became engaged in a series of sharp disputes with Britain. A conflict over the main boundary was resolved, but British involvement in Texas revived the movement to annex the Lone Star Republic to the United States. The Texas and Oregon questions became embroiled in the 1844 campaign as the Democrats nominated and elected the military expansionist Polk. After Texas was added to the Union, conflicts with Mexico over California and the Texas boundary erupted in war in 1846. American forces quickly conquered California and New Mexico. Winfield Scott's and Zachary Taylor's invasion of Mexico was also successful. The United States obtained large new territories in the peace treaty. Besides adding California, New Mexico, and Utah to American territory, the Americans trained a new generation of military leaders and aroused long-term Latin Americans' resentment of the United States. Most importantly, it forced the slavery controversy to the center of national debate as first indicated by the Wilmot Proviso.
The Wilmot Proviso, powerful end. Okay, so William Henry Harrison is elected president, and he is the first Whig president. And Henry Clay is very happy because Harrison is a general, and he's going to allow Clay to basically run the country with his American system. What's the problem with William Henry Harrison's presidency?
He dies.
He catches pneumonia and dies. So John Tyler, his vice president, becomes the president, and he's a Whig sort of. He's only a Whig because he hated Jackson. So he is so controversial that the Whig Party basically disowns him, meaning that in 1844, the election will be Clay, the elitist, versus James K. Polk, the best president you've never heard of. And Polk will be the manifest destiny president.
Oh, is that the guy who promised, he fulfilled all his promises?
He said that here's what I'm going to do as president. In one term, I'm going to settle the Texas border. I'm going to settle the Oregon border. I'm going to lower the tariff because I'm a Democrat, and that's what we Southern Democrats do. Because we be bad like that. And I'm going to get, what's his big prize? He says he wants what?
Texas.
Mexican concession.
Settles the border with Texas.
California.
California. Moving all the way west. I'm going back to Cali. So, how does he do it? Well, the border with Oregon is simply split with England in a treaty. That's kind of what the Democrats said too. They were like, you know what, that's lame. Why don't you go to war with England? Why didn't Polk want to go to war with England? Yeah, England's strong, okay? He does lower the tariff. This is easy. All Democrats do. He's a Southern Democrat. But now he has a little issue. How am I going to settle the Texas border dispute and get California? What country had California at that time?
Mexico.
Mexico.
Sorry.
That's all right. So, James K. Polk sort of says, I got an idea. By the way, do you think George Washington would have liked James K. Polk's idea?
No.
No. So here's what James K. Polk does. Remember, when it comes to wars, you need causes and consequences. So Polk says, I'm going to park the U.S. Army on the border of the Rio Grande River facing Mexico. And I'm going to wait for Mexico to attack. Will Mexico attack? You're
Yes.
damn right they did. And you get the start of the Mexican-American War. Remember, we need causes and consequences. That's all we ever need of wars in APUSH. Heimler taught us this. If you were here last week, we mentioned that with the American Revolution. The causes. Polk wants California, and he wants to settle the Texas border. So, he parks the army on the Rio Grande, which is the Texas border today.
That's the river right there.
Yep. And he waits for Mexico to attack. When Mexico attacks, he says, we got the war! Yay! Cool. Within 10 months, the U.S. Army invades and captures Mexico City. Uh-oh. By the way, you want the 5 on the AP test score, there is a Whig congressman who has the guts to stand up in Congress and say, I want to know the exact spot.
Lincoln. Sorry.
Exactly. Abraham Lincoln is against the Mexican War. Will Abraham Lincoln be reelected? No, because they're like, how dare you go against manifest destiny? Lincoln, who was in the House of Representatives at this time as a Whig, wants to know the spot. He gives this speech, and he's like, we shouldn't even be there. He wants to know the spot of the army. And he's looked at as unpatriotic. He would not be reelected because of that. They nicknamed him Spotty Lincoln, and that is not a compliment. Spotty Lincoln, go home. They're chastising him. Consequences. The U.S. negotiates a treaty by force. And that treaty will, the Texas border becomes the Rio Grande River. That's exactly what the U.S. wanted. And what else do we get? We call it the Mexican what?
Cession.
Cession. We rip 40% of Mexico's land away. And we call it the Mexican Cession. For those of you who aren't great with geography, you might remember labeling it on the Manifest Destiny map that we did right before Christmas. The Mexican Cession is the modern states of Utah, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and
California.
California. One last little bit on the Mexican Cession. There is a House of Representatives delegate from Pennsylvania who rises in the House and he says, excuse me, pardon me, but, excuse me, but in all, wait. In all of these new Mexican Cession areas that you call this, there should be no slavery. His name was David Wilmot. It becomes called the Wilmot Proviso. Proviso is an addition to a bill. Does the Wilmot Proviso ever pass?
No.
But what is the historical significance? What's the only topic in all of American history between the Wilmot Proviso and the Civil War? There's one thing on the tongues of every person, and what is that?
Slavery.
Slavery. And that's why the Wilmot Proviso was important. The bill never passes, but the Wilmot Proviso says there will be no slavery in this area again. Not Wilmot, Wilmot. And it will change the political landscape. It changes politics to only slavery. What does it say? That there will be no slavery in this area. It never passes.
Don't some states pass it, show support for it?
Yes, well, now that's 5 on the AP test stuff. Well done, Mr. Beatty. All but one northern state will pass it in their state legislatures to show support for it, and it passes the House. Why does it pass the House? Because the North controls the House at the time. It does not pass the Senate, because the Senate is balanced. Okay? Excellent work tonight, guys, on a beautiful sunny day, on a day when you took the PSAT. That's not easy to go through something like this. We covered heady topics tonight. A lot of political history in this topic. I'm proud of you all. Well done. I'll hang around for a while if you have questions. Good night, everyone.
Timur, the